Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and this week we are looking at wheels and how I make my wheels. Now before we get started, I will say there is a link in the description to the original video that inspired me to make the wheels in this particular way. So go ahead, click on that video and give that video some love. It is a great little video. But let's crack on. For a while now, I've been making these 3-part wheels, and these are for ants and for beetles. And I've actually even tried this technique up in featherweights as well with not great results. But so the 3 parts because they are silicone outer, a TPU or flexible inner, which gives it a little bit of protection against spinners and things, and then some form of internal hub. So in the ant weights, it's an ABS printed hub, which is just press fit onto the shaft. And in beetles, this is Annie Are You OK's wheel. It's a brass hub or an aluminium hub, because I've moved over to aluminium recently because they are a little bit lighter. But there is one big flaw with these, and that is, you can see this one here. This one has been in a fight, and I'm not even sure if you're going to be able to get this on camera, but there is a little dash of glue in here, and that glue was there to keep the silicone on the rubber wheel, and it hasn't worked. It worked a little bit, but then it got ripped off in a fight, which is obviously not a good thing. So the other thing too is I've had a couple of people recently talking to me about my wheels and how I make them, so I figured I'd go through a little bit more the process of these, because the last time I did this, I did 3 or 4 different processes, and then I did just a wrap up, and I didn't really kind of go through the full process all in one go. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the whole process all in one go, and I'm also going to talk about some improvements. Actually, I'm going to test some improvements first. If you just want results, skip to the end of the video, but we're going to look at some improvements to the design of the wheels and also the design of the molds. So these are the molds that I have been using, and there are files for these on Thingiverse, well, at least for that one, I think. These are the ones that are all customized versions of the same idea. So these are a 2-part mold, which means that they have an outer mold, an inner mold, and then I've also got this little locking lug that centers down and through the whole mold so that it actually centers up and the cast comes out symmetrical and concentric and all of that kind of stuff. The other features of this mold, it's got 2 little wings on the side, which are there to grab hold of and then push down to release the middle section of the mold. Now this stuff works, and it works okay, except for after repeated use. Now these are a little bit grotty because they have been used a lot. These are just PLA, and you can see that when the silicone cures, you can literally just peel this stuff off. So that's why I don't use any mold release or anything, because I don't really need it. But after repeated use, the little locking lug in the bottom that makes this all concentric has broken, especially on these beetle ones, which are admittedly quite large, and there's a lot more force involved in prying the top cover off than there is in these little ones. Now, these little ones I have done a bunch of different things with. So this guy has just got a regular tread around the inside, but this one here I've actually got a cat tread in around the inside, which actually does give you cat treading. There we go, if that will focus on that. Yeah, kind of on there. So you can do all sorts of stuff with these, so they're good fun. But yeah, getting them to separate is a bit of a pain. The silicone doesn't, even though it will peel off, there is still quite a lot of surface area, so when you're peeling off, you have to be very careful, and a lot of times you need to put a screwdriver in between to like wiggle the 2 parts apart. This one is just the same deal, but just thinner for my spinner ant weights that don't need as much traction. Anyway, so that's the old molds. These are, well, I've got 2 ideas for the new molds. This is one of the new molds, which you can see is actually a little bit bigger because it has to mold around the wheel this time. And then the actual locking lug now is a full fit to the wheel. So you can see this guy here, if I do this right, it should fit all the way on the wheel like this, and then all of that pushes through the bottom down here as well. If I can just do that. There we go. So it will center up, and there's a lot more surface area down here. So you shouldn't break, or hopefully I won't break these as often when doing the molding. So that's one of the ideas. The other idea is this. So it's the same thing. It is a mold. It's now a 3-part mold though. So this is to help with getting everything back out again. Basically the idea is to use binder clips, binder clip this thing together like this, put the top of the mold in, compress that all together, hold everything in place, and then when it's time to release the wheel, unsnap, and we should even probably be able to just like slice that out, which means that we're going to have a lot less force on the wheel. But I have no idea if this is going to work, because keeping everything concentric is more important than being able to release these things all that easily. But we'll see how we go with that one. So that is the molds themselves. There's a lot kind of that I've just covered rather quickly there. Let's look at the new wheel design. Now, I'm really not sure if this is picking up on camera. This is basically just like a little mesh lattice going all the way around the circumference. The idea is that there's just so many of these that you get so much surface area that the silicon's not going to slide. It's not a great idea, I don't think, but it is one of the two that I'm actually going to try out. So I've got 2 of these, and we're going to put one of each of these into the 2 different mold types I was talking about, and we'll have a look at how those go. Then the other one is this guy. So this here is the kind of final design for this. So it's got holes all the way through the outer wall, and it's also got ridges. So hopefully with silicon jammed into the hole, it's not going to move in any direction, but then also there's little ridges to kind of enforce that and to allow it to transmit more power through the silicon. Now, I've cleaned up the support materials that was in these holes, but not all that well, because any support material that was clinging in there, I don't really care about. It's actually a good thing that it's clinging in there, because it gives more surface area for the silicon to hold on. So I'm just about to set up here, just getting gloves on, because that is the final step. This gets really, really messy, so you definitely want gloves for this. I have silicon here, which says 100% silicon. This is a bathroom silicon, which seems to be the thing that people need to use. It has to have a certain type of cure, which is acetic cure. It says on the bottom down here, if that will focus up. I will put that on the screen as well. It has to be that type of silicon, and you'll be able to tell if it's that type of silicon, because when it's curing, it will smell very vinegary. So in a little while when we release these, which is like 12 hours later when you release these, if you get a really vinegary smell, that's great. If you don't, then you've used the wrong silicon and you need to find different silicon. And this is the common cause of these messing up, is this silicon not being the right type of silicon. So this is the key ingredient that you need to get right. Other than that, I've got some glycerin, which is sold as like hand sanitizer or like hand cleaner or something. And I've got some acrylic paint, which you only need very, very little of both of those things. So I've had these for ages, and yeah, you can see I've used barely any of it. Then finally we have our molds, and I also have some disposable pots here and some sticks, some pop sticks. So I'm just going to open the silicon up, and then we are going to make one of these. So really, to make this, you just guesstimate how much silicon you think you need. I'm just going to put a decent amount in here, because we are going to try and do all of the molds in the semi-setup time that we have here, which I don't really know what it is, probably 10-15 minutes before the silicon starts to get a little bit globby. It's probably going to be enough for this. So then we're just going to add a tiny amount of paint. Not much, just a dash. And I've found that it doesn't really matter how much silicon you're using. Oh, that's probably too much actually. But even a tiny amount of paint and a tiny amount of glycerin is going to do the trick. It doesn't scale all that much. Like, you can put twice as much silicon in here and you still only need a tiny, tiny amount of each of these. But you'll see I'm not really being overly precise. I'm just putting a little of both in. So that's that done and dusted, and then we get our pop stick and we literally just stir. Now the point of the paint doesn't actually do anything. It is just to show you when you've actually got the mixture correctly mixed. It's the glycerin that starts the reaction for the silicon, but I don't actually think it does anything beyond getting the reaction started. Once the reaction's going and the silicon is cured, that's just that, and then the glycerin evaporates out or something. I don't actually really know, to be honest. But it doesn't affect it all that much. I've definitely put too much glycerin in before, and it does thin the silicon a little bit, but not enough to make huge amounts of difference. So we are going to start by taking our pop stick, and now this you can see is kind of a thick consistency. We're literally just going to smear this onto our part and try and force it into all of the cracks and all of the holes. Just push down as much as you can to get the silicon really in there. You will get excess everywhere. This is why you're wearing gloves. There is so much mess in this process. It's just part of it, really. Yeah, and yeah, any excess you just scrape off and add back into your set for later. That's probably about enough on there. Now this one I want to put into a 2-part mold, so I'll get my 2-part mold, and once again we're just going to smear around the inside. And these guys, actually the new ones probably don't need as much silicon on them as the old ones did. The smear is mostly just to get really into the cracks and into the crevices down in here as we go. You can see I'm not putting huge amounts on, but I'm getting into those cracks, because anywhere you don't get silicon, you'll get a bubble when you get this mold released eventually. So there we go, just like that. There's probably actually more than enough silicon in there, and we'll see that in a second because we'll get squeeze out. So there we go, bit of silicon in there. Now we take our top, and the trick that I like to do is before I get it all settled, I put it in and I spin it a little bit, but I think, oh, that wheel is actually a little bit too big, I think. Oh, that could be interesting. All right, so we're just going to try and jam this in. Yeah, that wheel I think is actually almost too big for this mold. That's going to make life difficult. Hopefully the other one is actually a little bit better. Now, you can see I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit because, yeah, I think that wheel is actually too big for this mold. So I'm going to have to shrink that, or at least the features on it need to be shrunk a little bit so that it can fit into this mold a little better. Come on. Go in there. Now, of course, everything is slippery, so that's not helping matters. Oh. Okay. I'm going to call this one a boss for the moment, and I'm going to try the next one. Okay, here we go. Let's try this guy out, and we'll see if we can get this to work. So, like I was saying, I normally kind of give it a bit of a twist as it goes in, just to kind of even out the silicon. Now I'm going to push down, and I'm going to get squeeze out the top here, and you can see that. And we're just going to quickly knock a bit of that squeeze out off, because anything we don't knock off, we're going to have to cut off later. So. And that will just about do that one, and the squeeze out is good. You want a little bit of squeeze out because it means your mold is full, and you will actually compact some air bubbles by getting some squeeze out. So that's a good start. All right, I'm going to make the rest of these up, and then we're going to come back in 12 hours to demold. Okay, so it's 8 hours-ish later, something like that, and these things are ready to demold. Now, these aren't fully cured yet. You can see that this stuff is actually cured, and it actually peels off these bowls rather nicely, but it's still not fully cured. It's still a little bit smelly, and it's still going through that curing process. So I'm just going to try this guy first, because this one I think has the most chance of being an easy to separate mold. Oh yeah, look at that. That's come out so nicely. All right, can I get the rest of this apart though, is the question. Because of course this was only a 3-part mold with a top and a side and a bottom, because I wanted it to still self-center so that everything was still actually in the right spot. Oh, and this is difficult. I might have to go and get tools to get this apart, maybe. Oh, come on. The problem, I think, is that we've got gunk in the bottom section there. Let's see if we can just... that's lifted it a little bit, but it's not actually got it as far as it needs to go. So let's see if I can pull some of this stuff out of here. Maybe. Oh, there we go. Haha! Okay. So that's come out okay, actually. It does need some cleanup. For sure, there's lots of flashing and stuff that needs to be cleaned up off of here, and also the wheel needs to come off of the top section, but that's actually going to be a little bit harder because mine elephant-footed, so they're kind of jammed in on this guy a little bit, but that's okay. I'll be able to get that off in a little bit, but this does not look at, oh, look at that. Yeah, that's not good. That's just like peeling straight off, so I don't, although that way is pretty good. So, alright, well, we'll see how that goes when we get that out later. Let's pop one of these guys. I think this one is the other type. Yeah, there we go. That one's pushed down a lot better. Although it didn't stay there. The silicone does like to suction everything back together. I might, need to get tools to get these apart further than this. Screwdriver and such, which is something I was trying to avoid, but it looks like not all that possible to avoid having to do that, because if I keep doing this I am going to hurt my fingers. I think these do really suction together quite well, which I guess is why the beta weight ones are so hard to come apart, and why the beta weight ones were breaking as they were. Come on out. You know what, I think we're almost there on this one. Oh, come on. Just last little bit. Oh, there we go. That was a good little click. Okay, I think we're there. Kind of. What's holding us up here? Good thing about these is because these pegs are a lot bigger, you can get your fingers into them to help release the mold. Oh man. This is very tough, which is of course why I did the 3-part mold. To try and fix this, and I think it did fix this, because this is a lot harder to do than the 3-part mold one was. Come on out. Aha! There we go. Alright. So, this is the one that has more stuff on the actual... Oh yeah, look at this. This one's so much better. You can see, pulling down, it does release a little bit, but not anywhere near as much as the other one. So I think this guy might be the goer. Anyway, I'm going to get these cleaned up. Well, actually, I'm going to leave these out here for another 12 hours because they still, still smell very, very vinegary. So I'm going to leave these out here for a little while, and then we will come back to this in another, 8 to 12 hours. Basically, just giving them enough time to set up and cure properly. And this one is the monstrosity mistake that, I just stuffed up on. Looks interesting, but yeah, that's a fail. Anyway, I'm going to leave these out here until they have cured and stopped smelling, and then we will go from there. While those are curing, let's talk about testing tactics, because we're making some changes, which means we need to test some things. So I want to look at testing the wheel this way, how well the silicone holds up to being pushed sideways across the wheel, which in that test just there, and even in this test, it don't work so well. They come off really quite easily, especially without glue. But I also do want to make sure that the wheel has enough grab on the silicone to transfer torque into the ground. So that's where I've brought Boris back, because Boris right now has a little N20 gear mechanism on it that can drive a beetle weight. So I want to use these to force wheels to be pulled across the ground, and then we might also use a similar chassis, or maybe even the same chassis, to get these wheels to push a much heavier weight than an ant weight and just force them to push a lot of torque through them, so that we can test whether or not these wheels actually hold under good fight conditions or under stressful fight conditions. So here's that test chassis that I was speaking about. Basically, it's designed to take one of these modules over here, slap it in the back, and have the wheel run in through the back. And then we have two dead motors that need to sit up the front up here, which will be our test point. So here we go. This is our little trike setup. And actually, this is kind of cool. I might have to come back to this at some point. When I was doing my CAD, I had kind of a rough gauge of this, but I didn't have the full CAD of it in there. So I actually quite like the way that looks. I mean, it's very unstable right now because this front wheel is not touching the ground, which means there's a rock point, but that's pretty cool. Anyway, we're getting pretty close to 8 hours. I'm gonna go see how those silicones are curing and if it's time to get these things ready and mounted up to the test track. Okay, so here we go. These are now fresh out of the molds and out of their 8 hours of extra cure time. They're still a little bit stinky, so they're probably not fully done, but they are a lot firmer to the touch, and like I said, they're okay. They're fine enough that I can bring them inside and not be overwhelmed by the vinegar smell, so we're pushing ahead with this. Now, this guy here is a test. This one is, well, they're all tests, but this one is our control test. This one is actually a regular hub like this with nothing special going on with silicone on it. And you can see the actual mold and cast came out pretty well. There's flashing on all of these because I haven't cleaned these up yet. But this one actually came out pretty decently. The silicone does peel off this thing pretty well. Like, it's pretty easy to do that, but I honestly don't think there's going to be much difference between this and this, which was cast separately and stretched over. So we're going to clean up the flashing around the edges just with a pair of scissors. I find that a tiny little pair of scissors is best, and I kind of just chamfer off the back corner. It does mean that I lose a tiny little bit of the tread around here, but on the grand scheme of things, that doesn't matter. So that's that one. The next one I want to have a look at is actually this guy. This is the monstrosity that happened when we couldn't get the mold together. And the reason I want to have a look at this is because this is the one that I left all of the support material in the holes. If my camera would focus. Yeah, there we go. So we left all the support material in the holes, which means the silicone didn't penetrate quite all the way through. And you can see, kind of, yeah, there you go. You can see my hand perfectly through there, and I have not done any cleanup on this. The other one that had holes in it, if you look in the back of there, you can see there are blobs of silicone everywhere inside there. And I've done one little bit of cleanup where I popped a kind of a little ring of it out of here, but you can still see, if I kind of like wobble that around, there are still blobs of silicone in there, which is where the silicone has come through the holes. The only one that doesn't have that is the hole that sits on the side where the peg of the mold came through. So I think I'm going to update these molds, and I'm going to update this wheel so that it's only got holes where these pegs come through, so you don't get loads and loads of bleed in through the middles of these guys, because yeah, that's just going to add weight and it's not really adding anything extra. If I grab hold of this right where there's bled through, you can see I'm getting a good bit of stretch, but I can't pull this out. I really can't pull this off. So that means that just having just a tiny little bit through the hole, which has been stopped by the finger that went down in there, that's perfectly fine. You don't need all of this globby mess up inside the wheel. Extra pull test, you can see if you don't pull the support material out, you actually have issues with that because it doesn't penetrate all the way through, and you can eventually unpeel that off of there. It takes a bit of force, and it takes a bit of force in the peeling direction, but if we grab hold of it, oh yeah, nah, look at that, that's all right, that's just come straight off. Anyway, then we've got this guy, which these ones are the ones that have the meshing inside of them, and yeah, I'm not too keen on this. I didn't believe it was going to work all that well to be in the first place, to be honest. It's okay, it's not worked brilliantly, but we need to clean these guys up and test them. And like I said, we're just going to clean up with a pair of scissors. So, what did we just learn? A lot, as it turns out. First of all, the failure mode on these wheels is not what I was expecting. I was honestly expecting that it would be the lateral forces that would push the silicone off these tires, but as we just saw in all of that testing, no amount of lateral force could do that, or at least the amount of lateral force needed is so high that you break traction on your drive wheel before you push the silicone off sideways. So that's an interesting thing. That means that it's very, very unlikely that, especially in an ant weight, that your opponent is pushing you hard enough sideways to get your wheels to come off. Even in the worst case scenario, which is this default version, which is literally just an old hub not designed for co-molding that has been co-molded, yeah, they're not pushing these off you by pushing you sideways. That's just not a thing. And yeah, the Mould version of this, the one that's actually on the robot right now, or the test rig right now, is the way to go. Those holes through the chassis through the hub give the silicone enough grip that even in the high torque situation, the wheel did not come loose or come off in any way. Whereas everything else, the original version, the dual cast version, the original version, which is the one that I normally use, the default version, and the grid version, all came off under that high torque load. That constant skidding against the floor caused the silicone to loosen up and just boop, come off. Which, yeah, once again, that's not the failure mode that I was expecting at all out of all of this, but it's the failure mode we got. Data is interesting. I like data. Yeah, so there you go. I'm not sure that this is the final greatest design for these. There is still a lot of silicone that kind of gets left over inside the hub itself. But I will be throwing this style, the one that has worked, up on my mini factory. So there'll be a link to that in the description down below. But once again, use that at your own risk. This is not the final design of this I'm ever going to use. There is a lot of cleanup needed for these as they currently stand. And yeah, I'm gonna have to redesign either the mold or the hub or where the hole placing is on that hub, just to kind of finalize that design out, round it out, and make it just better. It's good as it is, don't get me wrong, but it can be better from here because this is literally just my first attempt doing this type of co-molding. It's interesting. I like it. We'll do a little bit more of this, but probably much later on. I'll probably do a few experiments off camera, and then I will do a final silicone wheel video where I'll probably even look at some beta weight stuff as well, because this stuff could also use a bit of an update. But anyway, that is all I have for you this week. I hope you guys have enjoyed that one, and I will see you in the next video.